Alright, where in the world has Bearstow's Barnstormers been for the last 4 months? The answer is moving across the country, frankly. I took a new job. New job is very interesting. New job required me to move, and so I spent a good amount of time in the process of moving. In that process, I've realized that the amount of time that the Revell Memphis Belle is taking is currently not going to work with the schedule I need to achieve for myself and for the recipient of the model aircraft. So, a decision has been reached, and the decision was reached after I spent like 8 or 9 hours one day just working through riveting. Got a lot of it riveted out, and then read an article about how if you use the pinwheel riveters and you do it to the bare plastic, it doesn't show through. Then I remembered our Texas Raiders build, featured on the screen right now, and realized that, hey, this thing's pretty much ready to go out of the box. And then I realized, circa 2022, HKM released the 1-48 B-17F Flying Fortress with the Memphis Belle livery. So that was the point where I decided, you know what, for the sake of time, sanity, and requirements, we're going to go ahead and pause the Revell build. I will come back to it. I know at least one of my Instagram followers really wants to see that model finished. And frankly, it inspires me to go ahead and finish it and to design even more 3D printable parts to correct that kit. I really wish there was a die I could 3D print that just covers the whole wing with all the rivet positions, and you just smack it and it puts all the rivets in at once. And so that would be so nice. But yeah, so after sitting for 8 hours and working on rivets, I realized I'd only done one half of one side of the fuselage and the 2 horizontal stabilizers. And that was the point where I threw in the towel. So we're back into the HKM kits. The F model, interestingly enough, came out after the G model did by about 2 years. And the F model has some improvements in it, which I really like that they took a 2-year-old kit and improved upon it almost immediately, right? The Revell kit's originally from the 1970s. I think it's 1978. That's been new tooled and boxed and rebranded and resold to different manufacturers. And eventually it's gone from Monogram through a chain of events into Revell's hands. And that's where it resides. And it hasn't really been touched since 2008. So it was kind of a no-brainer once we realized. And realistically speaking, I've had the Revell Memphis Belle in my stash for longer than 2 years, 2.5 years now, with the intention of building it for its recipient, and it's just been kind of stonewalled with other things going on. And when it finally came time to build it, we're now left with, there is no longer just one option for this kit, there are 2. And the second one is far superior, and not that much more expensive, frankly, like well within the margin of reason to justify expending that much money on the second kit. I covered that more in the B-17G video, but I think the Memphis Belle kit right now is like $70 to $80. It fluctuates a little bit. And the HKM kit's like $110, $120. So yes, it is more, but for what you get out of it, it's a lot better kit for the money. But anyway, that's my opinion. The Revell kit's fine if you want to just build it out of the box and get a B-17 on the shelf. You know, no judgment. If that's what you want to do, fully support it. It is your build. It's your stash. Do what you like. And if any of the tools and tricks I can eventually finish up for it, improve your enjoyment out of it, then great. I would love to see that, and I would love the feedback. Anyway, now that we've covered the bad news, the good news is since I've built this kit, it's going to go much faster. So Memphis Belle is targeted to be about a 2-video evolution. I will likely do a full build video summary at the end. I'm going for a very aggressive release schedule on this now that I'm kind of situated with a flat surface on which to build and a single light. So obviously what you're watching on screen is old model bench. New model bench, a new model bench isn't built yet. And my current setup is very, very temporary. So there'll be some notable differences in the video quality. I likely will go down just a touch with some extra noise. I don't have all my lights here. So just fair warning, stick with me, we'll work it out. This time I printed the Wright 1820s on a Anycubic M3 Max, and I honestly think the build quality came out a lot better. So previously I was using the Geeetech Alcade, and it's fine. It's like a 2K resolution printer, and it's relatively small. The Anycubic M3, it's a 7K printer with a huge print base that I got for doing the Iowa class turret, and which is still in work, by the way. And it's just printing a lot better, I feel. I went ahead and modified the print file for the engines as well to fit the HKM kit a little bit better. They're not quite where I want them, so a little bit more adjustment will be made. They are the same exact model that I used for the Texas Raiders as far as the original file. I did not make them. I did not CAD them. I will put the link to them in the description of this video. That's why I'm not willing to provide any, files for the modification that I made to trim it to fit the HKM. It's not mine. And I wish it was. They're very good. It's a very good design. But yeah, so I'll put the link in. They're very cheap and frankly, well worth the extra effort, in my opinion, compared to the kit parts, which the HKM kit parts aren't bad. They just take a little bit extra work to get there and are much more difficult to incorporate electric motors into at the end of the day. Memphis Belle has a little bit of a different coloring to Texas Raiders. The Memphis Belle interior, most of the way through the aircraft, is actually aluminum finish. I did find references of the cockpit being a green finish. It'd be really cool if I could go through the Wright-Patterson Museum and climb in, but there's not a chance that that's going to happen. And so, yeah, a lot of it's just the bare aluminum finish. I did switch over from doing Alclad paints to doing the Mr. Color metallic paints. I found that they worked well for what I was doing. I'm not entirely sold on them yet. I think I'm going to use them a little bit more, and I think the next one I want to try is some lacquer paints, lacquer metallic finish, which I know to me is lacquer metallics are pretty good. So I would like to try those in the near future, and the next time I do a metallic build, I likely will. This push to try and get a good metallic and be satisfied with it is the entire reason why I have not built like my F-86 or my B-29. I really want to get that nailed before I do an aircraft that is so heavily aluminum finish or polished steel finish, anything that's just raw metallic finish on it. It's very daunting, and it's frankly, to me, it's like the ultimate boss of modeling is getting a good metallic finish. So more practice, more work to be desired, and this is where having like a paint mule really comes into play. So I used to have a Spitfire or a Revell Spitfire Mark II kit that I used a little bit as a paint mule, and I had an F-84 kit, again, Revell. And so anyway, the purpose of the paint mule is you go test this, right? And so I practiced foiling on my F-84 and wasn't super happy with the surface finish I was getting, and now I realize what I was doing wrong, so one day I may take a chance at foiling again, though foiling does get a little bit expensive depending on the size of the model. And it may not last as long as we want, ultimately. So there's metallic paints that realistically I could get to similar quality, but it's going to take some practice. Similar to the HKM kit, we're going to put on the seat cushions that add a little bit better detail. And looking here, it's pretty crude, but once you look through the cockpit glass, it actually looks really good. And once they're also weathered down a little bit with seatbelts included, they do look a lot better. So a nice simple addition, just using a couple strips of styrene cut to about equal size on each side. And it really does improve the kit overall. You can find plenty of images for resources on the B-17's seats, which do show these seat cushions and you can kind of get a good frame of reference for them. If I wanted to go the extra detail, which one day, if and when I do the 1/32 HKM B-17, I likely will, I'd probably make a CAD model and put some wrinkles in it and whatnot and some seams and really exploit it. But at this scale, it's not really worth it. And again, you can't see a whole lot into the B-17's cockpit anyway, even with the lights. Speaking of lights and electricity, that's a good segue. There are some changes with the electrical plan for this aircraft. So the previous one, the Texas Raiders, we did the engine startup sequence and some lights in the interior of the aircraft and the landing lights. Memphis Belle, we're going a step further. Memphis Belle includes some speakers in the wings, so we're going to get engine noise organically from the aircraft model. So all of the sound that you hear of an engine startup will be from the model, not from post-production in the video. I think that's pretty cool. For the rest of the aircraft, I have also included position lights through the dorsal, through the vertical stabilizer, and through the horizontal stabilizers. There were position lights, blue position lights through that skin, and the vertical had some red ones. So those are included. Similar to the Revell model, or at least the part of the Revell model I completed and showed on video, I also have the wingtip nav lights, so the red and green lights dependent on each side. If you don't know which is which, top tip, the right-hand side of an aircraft has the green light, the left-hand side has the red light. And that is easy to tell because green and right both have 5 letters in them, so it's a really nice, easy way to figure it out. What this does is it helps you determine whether a ship, originally a ship, is coming towards you or going away from you. So it was a good navigational visual cue to tell you whether you were in danger or not. And that translated over to aircraft because a lot of things on aircraft were originally based on the nautical theme. As for the actual aircraft, Memphis Belle, which is a fascinating aircraft. So, despite being famous and alluded to particularly in the movie for being the first aircraft to complete 25 missions, she wasn't. First B-17 to complete the 25 mission cap requirement was actually Susie Q, which operated in the Pacific Theater in 1942. Memphis Belle was among the first, but was not the first. Memphis Belle, however, is recognized as being the first because the U.S. Army Air Force decided to work with the United States government and use the aircraft for essentially to sell war bonds. So war bond was they flew it around to big events in major cities. The crew actually flew it, and people could buy a war bond from the United States government with the promise that it would be paid back with interest after World War II. And it was a good way for the U.S. government to earn money required to field, technology, equipment, everything cost associated with the war. The 25 mission requirement was later upped to 30 missions and then again to 35 missions. And this was really just for the crew, not the aircraft. So that's how you end up with like 909, the original B-17 909, not the Collins Foundation 909 that we lost a couple years ago. That aircraft racked up 140 bombing missions. The mission cap was entirely dependent on your Air Force, so Memphis Belle being part of the 8th Air Force, the 25 at the time, and then expanded to 30 and 35. That was the rule for the 8th Air Force during World War II. Focusing back on the model now, you'll note that I did not put any bombs in the bomb bay. Entertainingly enough, I built Texas Raiders and made it very clear that Texas Raiders was not a World War II B-17, did not complete any World War II bombing missions. And here we are with an aircraft that did, and we put bombs in the Texas Raiders build, but not in Memphis Belle. Memphis Belle is not going to be displayed on its landing gear. It is going to be held in a representative in-flight position. And as such, I want to put the mount for it into the bomb bay. I have actually strengthened the roof is it a roof? It's not really a roof, but the top of the bomb bay I've strengthened to take the aircraft's weight, and it's going to be held in that position. So that's why there's no bombs in the bomb bay. There's no bomb racks in the bomb bay either. It's just the central truss, which gives the structure to the actual interior compartment of the aircraft, and it's the side bulkheads. On screen now you'll see the radio equipment that I actually 3D printed for the Revell model and are available on my GrabCAD page. And I just wanted to do a little bit of dry brush, make them weathered. One of the big things I found interesting was looking at the internal shots the U.S. Air Force provided after the restoration of Memphis Belle, and noting that a lot of the radio equipment's in a bare aluminum finish. It's not painted black, similar to how Texas Raiders equipment was shown, and many of the other bombers. And so I thought that was an interesting little detail. And doing some more research, it seems that some aircraft were or did have painted radios, some aircraft didn't. If you know anything about this, please comment, because I'm very interested to know why that choice was made, whether it was just a shortage or a prevalence of paint or not. That would be very interesting to know. I was not able to find anything myself that would indicate one way or the other. When I built Texas Raiders, I had a lot of issues getting the full fuselage assembly to go together properly. And it actually ended up giving me issues when I was fitting the upper deck, the top part of the fuselage to the main section of the fuselage. It gave me a huge seam running down each side. I tried to balance it as much as possible so I would have as minimum fillers or filler putty as I needed. And unfortunately, there was quite a bit. And I did a lot of that off camera because it was pretty extensive and it took me a long time to get it right. And it just wasn't really good camera material. This time I'm being a little bit more careful with my spacing on the internal structure of the aircraft, so the crew compartment, the bulkhead to bulkhead. The top of the bomb bay, I did not listen to my Texas Raiders build, and it's really funny and it was very frustrating, but I did end up actually snipping off the alignment tabs that go through the bulkheads on one side again, and so one side I didn't do it, and I realized it too late, and the other side I did. And so it's just kind of suspended there with glue, and it's very annoying, but that shouldn't be too much of an issue. And getting the spacing right on everything else, I really did focus down on to try and help prevent the nose from not fitting correctly and the top, the roof, from not fitting correctly as well. As the model sits, I have been playing with assembling it and trying to get that really cinched down around the internal structure. So it does seem to require quite a bit of pressure. A lot of that may be the electrical wiring, as it does run around the bulkheads around the bomb bay. There is space for it to pass, but I can imagine with the amount of wiring that's in this model, it's considerably more than Texas Raiders. So I do need to be careful. The wiring may be providing a little bit of resistance and need to get really pushed into place. So I'm working on that. It should be shown in the end of the episode with the top roof on, so you'll be able to tell me if I did a good job or not. The other thing I really liked about Memphis Belle's interior detail is the presence of the anti-skid pads. I thought that was a nice detail. So I just kind of did that with some Mr. Color 1500 or Mr. Surfacer 1500, and I did my regular wood technique around it. So that purely is you prime it with the Mr. Color 1500 or Mr. Surfacer 1500, whichever one it is. It's on the screen. It's on the screen. But yeah, so you go ahead and put that down, and then you paint over it with, I use a little bit of Tester's Orange. And then once I've laid it over, I use some thinner, and I tried to apply the orange relatively sparingly, and then once I apply the thinner, it starts to show the black through the bottom, and it gives kind of a grainy effect, similar to the wood grain you would see in an actual sheet of plywood. And I think it comes out well, and it also kind of darkens it up a little bit, makes it look a little dingy for footwear and whatnot. So there's other ways to do that, but I'm still kind of new to this technique, so I want to practice a little bit more. There is a two-tone paint scheme on the inside of Memphis Belle. So the cockpit area is a green color. So doing the exact same as I did to the other cockpit sections, I've got the Mr. Surfacer 1500 black, plus the green paint, or to me is green acrylic paint, dark green, and putting that together on the cockpit section, and then not aft in the waist gun section, sorry, that's the aluminum. But yeah, masked it off to make sure it didn't creep across the bulkheads, and then I applied the Mr. Color aluminum finish that's on the screen now as well. And overall, relatively satisfied. Again, it goes back to my previous conversation about the metallic colors overall. With this model, I also tried the black basing technique, which is why the primer's down first. It's something I really wish I had done on the interior of Texas Raiders, so it is a small change I made in the process of making this model, and I think it does come out a little bit better. It makes it a little bit more worn down, a little bit more used in appearance. And that's really what I'm going for. I'm going for a Memphis Belle that's towards the end of her bombing campaign and will soon be returning to the United States historically. And so I want her to look a little bit used, a little bit tarnished, not new out of the factory, just to really pay homage to her war record. On the subject of war records, it's time to add the waist guns. Now, Memphis Belle is an F model B-17, does not have the same waist gun positions as Texas Raiders did as a late model G aircraft. The waist guns are, in fact, in the same fuselage station, which is the fore-aft position in the aircraft. Additionally, as I'm looking at this, I'm realizing that I was supposed to trim out that lower section, same as the G model, I believe. I will have to go back to the instructions and double check that, because that might get very problematic now that there's a gun there. These things break very easily. In fact, I'm surprised that those gun barrels have not snapped off already. Texas Raiders did, almost all of them, on the way to while it was moving, so that was, excellent. Didn't foresee that coming at all, but I didn't really have a good way to package it, unfortunately, that would make it easy to move. Tail wheel installation's the exact same. Everything goes into the left side because there's alignment tabs on the HKM, and so it works out really well. Changed the way the lights are set up in the cockpit section on this one. So on Texas Raiders, the LEDs actually come through the floor underneath the pilot's seats. Pilot and co-pilot seats, I should say. And they're fine. It's not really a problem, but for space and just general ease and reducing the amount of wiring I was trying to use, I figured I would try to do this way, put them both in the same position and just see how it comes out. I do believe it'll be about equivalent. Nothing major difference, or no major difference once everything's assembled and all is said and done. But it just made it a little bit easier to wire. Here you can see the absolute, the vast amount of equipment that's in the wings, right? And I've kind of covered this for the most part with the control scheme. The extra board you're seeing, one in each wing, is the resistor board for the LEDs and the MP3 player. And here you can see me adjusting the input voltage to the motor system just to bring it nice and low. I think I've got a maximum of 4.5 volts on those motors, so I wanted to find a nice balance point where I could run the MP3 player, which is up to 5 volts, but it's looking for about 4.5, and where I could run the motors off the same power supply. So I did eventually tune it back up to about 4.5 volts, and everything's working just fine, as you'll see at the end of this video. And then I 3D printed some mounting brackets for the PCB, or for the PCBs, and just glued them in. And I try to work them around the existing support towers that are in the model molding. I did eventually cut out those center wing ones. They're not really necessary, and they did get in the way, so I just nipped them off real quick with a set of diagonal cutters. Here you can see the initial engine test, and hey, it works, so that's a good start. I did spend a lot of time tuning this one. I also positioned the Arduino in the wings such that I can disconnect the wing and get to the Arduino's USB port. So if something gets a little, if something gets run in and it's starting up a little bit too easily, it's not looking like it struggles like most of the radial engines look like, honestly, when they do the slow crank, I can always come back in and retune it. So that was an improvement I made over Texas Raiders, and in the future I'll probably actually connect a USB extension and put it somewhere that's more easily accessible. What I would really like to do is get these to the point where I can pull the motor out and replace it if needed, if it breaks or something like that. Both Texas Raiders and Memphis Belle, if I lose a motor here, that's it. We're not going to be able to replace them. It's going to be the end of life for that function of the aircraft. In the tail is where I put the navigation lights section, or the position lights section. So I did this with fiber optic, and I covered this in a short, I believe, or it was either a short or an Instagram reel. I'm going to reposition here, getting uncomfortable. And so what I do is I have the LEDs mounted in the tail wheel support on the aircraft, and then I 3D printed boxes to go around the LEDs. They look like they're just regular, cargo boxes kind of thing for just storing equipment. And at the top, I drilled out a 30 thousandths hole, and that was the size of the fiber optic line that I was using. Again, fiber optic safety, do not ever look into the end of a fiber optic if you don't know what light is feeding it, because you are concentrating that light through total internal reflection, and it can severely damage your eyes if you do that. Here, we're not looking at a very powerful LED, so again, I know it's at the other end, so it's fine. But general safety rule here. So anyway, I nip these off, insert them through the holes on the top of the box, and that gives us the light path from the LED itself out to the position lighting. I did it this way, obviously, for size constraints. I can't really get an LED bulb into the dorsal of the aircraft very easily without having a lot of light spillage throughout the rest of the cabin, which would be very visible. So having the fiber optic and tucking it up out of the way makes it, A, very hard to see inside the aircraft once the aircraft's closed up, and B, it does actually give us a nice small point light that would be relatively representative at scale. It did, however, make it very difficult to put the aircraft together. So the two horizontal stabilizers, as you can see, have position lights in them. There's one right in the middle there and one on the edge, and all through the vertical. But closing it up while also feeding those fiber optics to their source boxes was very difficult. It was doable, but it was a challenge. I had to kind of reach into the back of the model once it was glued together with some forceps and grab the fiber optic lines and push them in, which was awkward at an angle, and I definitely struggled, but it worked out at the end, and it works. I think an improvement I would do in the future is to internally maybe make a spherical mount around the LED itself. That way all the fiber optics are actually physically pointing at the center point, which is where the LED is illuminated. They're very sensitive to angles, so I think there's a couple on the right-hand horizontal stabilizer that are a little bit dimmer, and you can't really see any light coming out of them because they're not quite at the right angle to the source LED where it's mounted. So it's a good lesson to take away for next time. And here we are just trying to glue on the horizontals, and as I mentioned, have to glue the whole thing together and really, really fight with it. So it was definitely an adventure. Moving into the wing section, it's pretty much the same as last time. I spent a little bit more time and did some research on other B-17 coloring for their wiring channels and whatnot, and came out with a nice gold color on some of them. So I replicated that this time. I couldn't find a direct image of the inside of Memphis Belle's wheel wells, and as it sits currently in the Wright-Patterson Air Force Museum, or the National Museum of the United States Air Force as it's actually called, it's landing gear retracted, so you can't see up into the main landing gear wheel wells. So I just improvised with some other reference images. And here you can see me applying just getting a rough position for the engines. I don't have them actually glued in because I remembered my mistake from Texas Raiders, and I know that the exhausts have to go in, before I can glue the engine cowl flaps on. And I can't glue the cowl flaps on or put the exhaust in until I am at paint, because I need to be able to paint underneath where the exhaust goes. So there's a whole sequencing challenge here, but just leaving the motors taped on for now is going to be just fine for the time being. I may PVA glue them so that way I can break them off in the future without damaging anything. But for now, I'm just going to tape them in place. Putting the wings together, again, a challenge. There's a lot of equipment in the wings. There's a lot of wiring in the wings, so I had to be very, very careful. Finally, this brings us to kind of where we are today. The aircraft electrically is complete. I can plug it in, start it up, as you see here. And I have worked on putting the dorsal deck on, or the roof on, if you will, of the not passenger, crew area. So a lot of finagling to get the spacing right without a big seam line needing putty filled, and quite a bit of effort. At this point, I will mention I started a Patreon, so feel free to check that out. I will leave the link in the description, and I'm also starting to make some kind of custom stickers for each build. You know, model makers like to do their sticker thing. I've got some stickers. I haven't handed a bunch out yet at all. But I think I'm going to make a custom one for each build I do. So I really need to retroactively go back and do the A10 and the MiG-29, which I will do, and probably have them up on my Patreon as well. But yeah, and it's also a way for me to share some photography, so it's kind of a neat thing. I wanted to do it. And before we get out of here, remember to subscribe. I will see you guys quite shortly, hopefully, in the next one.